Welcome back, everybody, to episode 49 of Titans Up Today. I have Markus Lampinen here, and we're going to talk about AI. We're going to talk about technology, some geopolitics, some investing, a broad array of things. Markus, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jacob. I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. We were just discussing a little bit about the AI agent market, AI, and you're building a company called Prifina, which is essentially AI twins, or you could call them digital twins, even though that does have a separate connotation to those who are very technical, for everyday people. And so you've built and exited a few companies prior. So I have a ton of questions about how you're approaching building successful products. But what inspired and what was the specific set of opportunities or things and convergences that you are seeing in the market that's driving you to build Prifina?
A fantastic setup. Thank you for that. First of all, let's take a macro view. Like here, I'm based in Silicon Valley, or more specifically, San Francisco. And I think one of the things that we identified was the segment between B2B and B2C. That in the past decade, I would argue that it's been really hard to build a B2C company. And the big B2C companies that we've had, like the Snapchats and these of the world, they're quite old at this stage. So they were built in a different era. So one of the economic opportunities that we saw was that actually with AI, with the ChatGPT moment and so on and so forth, that's changed. Now you can actually credibly approach and build something direct to consumer. So that's one. The second thing that I think we saw early on, even earlier than that, was that we're all going to have AI in our lives. And at some point, we're going to want to have control over that AI. We're going to want it to work for us, not some huge technology companies only. And the only way that we know that you can actually control AI is that you control the fundamental data that goes into the AI. And that was like the impetus to Prifina. How can we, like you said, for everyday people, essentially get them to exert control, have their own AIs, own it, and ownership is a huge part of this, but also own essentially the outcomes, that it is actually performing tasks. It is working for you. And then if you think about it in the future, what does this look like? The way that we frame it is that on your business card, on your contact details in the future, you're going to have phone number, email, and your AI twin. Like it's going to be that simple. And why are you going to have that? I mean, for a lot of folks, like if you're thinking, listening to me talk here, like you're like, who is this guy? And so on and so forth. Yes, you can check out my LinkedIn, and yes, you can read interviews. You can listen to this one, but that takes a lot of effort. That takes a lot of time. If you can just essentially scan a code and talk to my AI twin and just say that, hey, who is this guy? Is this guy a jerk? Is this guy worth listening to? That's a very interesting and very easy interaction. So markets tend to move toward this efficiency. And if you can just make it super, super dead simple, have this type of interaction, that's, I think, where I'll go. And I think one of the things that we'll touch on here is that I'm now saying that you, the human, is going to talk to the AI twin, but there's nothing saying that your own AI twin might not actually have that conversation in the future.
And then what comes up to me just in everyday life, specifically business, but this would definitely apply outside of it, is just we've seen a rise due to remote work and globalization and other things like that of asynchronicity in communication. So being able to, you have one team that works 9 to 5 central, but then you have another team that's in Singapore or what have you. And everyone has gotten accustomed to being able to collaborate around Slack and around tools that doesn't matter if you're not active up at the same time, you're able to be productive. And I think one of the key things from an AI twin perspective and that Prifina would be potentially bringing to market, again, this has applications also in personal life as well. You want to tell somebody something but you're busy or they have questions and you can't reach the phone or whatever that might be. I could definitely see this making that more accessible. I think we've seen how like sometimes meetings just aren't even the most effective thing to do anymore. There's so much, my hand's not on a computer and I'm not typing something in, building something or creating something. It feels like potentially a waste of time. So talk a little bit more about what that user experience will be like with the AI twin and maybe some of the things that it'd be able to do for us.
Yeah. So you touched on a number of different types of things. And if you just pull that thread a little bit more, one is we all get asked in a professional, but also personal capacity, we get asked the same questions in different framing all the time. And I don't know about you, Jacob, but my patience isn't infinite. I can answer those questions a few times a day, but answering them 100 times a day, that's a lot. The AI twin it's not going to lose its patience. Like it's going to answer them politely, correctly, 100 times in parallel if it wants to, every single day in and out. But if you go a little bit deeper on that, it's going to answer them also in any language, which is it's like something from a technology point of view. It's like a giveaway. Like, of course, it's going to answer it in any language. But again, it's this added insight that I don't speak 160 languages, but the AI twin does. So not only can essentially somebody say that, hey, could Markus help you with this? Or for example, in the case of my AI twin, you could even ask about Prifina and AI twins. You could say that, hey, I'm the professor. How might I use an AI twin? Or I'm a business owner. How might I use an AI twin? And then my AI twin is going to guide them through that. Say that, hey, as a business owner, you might use it to answer customer questions about your products. You might use it as customer support. You might use it as like an interactive FAQ. You might use it to resolve customer issues, things like that. Very practical. So language is another kind of added benefit that comes out of the box. The other one is analytics. And this is one that you don't often think about, but if you got like, how should I say it? If you got, for example, let's say that you're a business owner and you got folks that are coming to your website and they're looking at your products, you don't know what they're thinking. So the AI twin actually gives you a way into looking into their thoughts. And the way that it happens is that when somebody talks to you, Jacob, for example, they're going to be polite. They're going to want to be courteous and they're going to want their questions to reflect well on that. But if they're talking to your AI twin as a business owner, they're not going to do any of it. They're going to be direct because first of all, the analytics and the interaction with the AI twin by default, it's anonymous. So you're not going to, unless they opt in, you're not going to know who they are. But this is a good thing because it means that they're going to be honest. And especially as a business owner that's selling product, you want them to be honest. You want to know where you're losing. You want to know what is it that they do not understand? What is it that they want, but you're not providing? What is the reason that they're not buying this product? Is it the price? Is it something else? Do they want it in teal? You don't know what you don't know. But we found that when you place AI twin in between two humans, whether or not they're buyer and seller or student and professor, or let's say coach and mentee, whatever that is, then there's a lot of this hidden insight that's lost because people will self-censor, or due to language, they might be uncomfortable asking a question that they can't ask in their own native language, for example. So very basic things like that actually unearth so much out. But you and I were talking a little bit before we started recording that this is today. This is not a year into the future. This is like baseline where we are. And one of the things, especially here in San Francisco, that I'm very fortunate in seeing is that when people talk about like the applications of AI and the impact of AI, they say that it's going to happen or it's going to do this. And I always say that it's already done. This has already happened for a large extent. And I'll give you two data points that I find fascinating. Like one, I was talking to the guy that runs essentially the data for Carta. I was listening to him speak about like the data that they've got. And he was just saying that Series A companies by median a year ago had a headcount of 20. And now they have a headcount of 12. So that has already happened. That's historical data. But that headcount shift, that's already there. And the second, it was, I think Andrew Chen from Andreessen Horowitz said that not the case that AI is taking jobs or it's taking your job or anything like that. It's the fact that those jobs don't exist anymore. And he said that it used to take on median, let's say 6 people to do this one task, and now it takes 3. AI hasn't done anything. It's just that because of the impact of the market, that doesn't exist like that. The fundamentals have changed. But these are 2 data points that when you apply them to the AI twins, like the baseline, this is already true. This is historical. So the interesting thing is that when you start applying these new economics and these new principles, then what does that enable? Because people often focus on the fact that you're going to have a lot of job loss and you're going to have a lot of movement in the market, which is true. But then at the same time, you're going to have so much economic opportunity on top of that to create things that just weren't possible before. And I think that's the really cool bit as an entrepreneur that I look at. And I just, honestly, I see it across every single silo of the market that if you can change the unit costs of doing something, and if you can bring them practically to zero, what can you do that? Like, what does that enable? And that will mean different things in terms of where you are.
And it's model evaluation and threat research. That was the study and the organization that I mentioned, because to add to that, there's that 50% every 6 months compounding. So what we've seen going to that data over the last year or 2 years, let's say I did a 2-year sample there, hasn't even taken into account what has happened in the last 6 months over the last 6 months. And now even going forward, add another 6 months and add 50% on top of all those other changes. And it's rapidly compounding to a place where, exactly like you're saying, the unit economics of the cost is essentially going to zero. So I have a question here on that. One of my last interviews, and this actually got a lot of engagement, a lot of people with him. And I was curious because what he said is, we don't know, because of all the venture money going into AI, the cost of labor today might not be the same as the cost of labor in another few years. And if we're not, quote unquote, subsidizing these models to be able to deliver and do the tasks that they're doing, then we could see that AI at some point becomes priced out by human labor once again. And my thought on that was, what about the models that are already existing, your 4.0 minis, that are so cheap to do the large majority of tasks? They're already, for the most part, deeply trained and effective. They've reached a threshold that has created all the previous changes that we were just talking about. What's your take on that? Do you think that there's a point where things become less cost effective when it comes to AI, or following, in my view, the general thread of continuous innovation and even accelerating innovation, and the factor that I mentioned about a lot of those models that are extremely effective already being solidified and trained, that we're just going to continue to see the pace of everything we're talking about unfolding?
So that's, first of all, that's a fantastic thought and it's a fantastic kind of question. It's also a really complex one because there's a lot of dimensionality to that. One is the fact that the models are getting cheaper by an order of magnitude all the time. In our engineering team at Prifina, we talked about this fact that a year ago, we were concerned about using tokens, just concerned about token usage. And that is a ridiculous thought in 2025. You don't care. Like, you can just throw so many tokens at problems and just solve them that. And I expect that's going to continue to decrease by orders of magnitude, mainly because of the fact that open source has been picking up so much, and that's going to drive down the cost. That's also going to make it really hard for model developers, especially not the tier 1 model developers, to actually build businesses, because it's like a land grab strategy that there may be, and I'm saying maybe, I don't know, there may be an economic return in being the dominant number 1 developer. That's not guaranteed either, but being a tier 2, that's really tough, because now you're like, you have to invest the billions and tens of billions into doing this. But at the same time, you're seeing essentially the unit economics go down and just collapse all the time. And the expectation from developers, also that tokens actually don't cost that much and performance is incredible. So that's one side. The other side is that if we kind of look at what are humans really good at, there are areas where humans are really good. And there are a lot of areas where humans are doing work where they're just not justified. And one of my favorite examples is just middle management. That if you essentially look at middle management in large companies, it's basically rules, process, and communication. And so it's like rules and enforcement of that and communication around. Those are 3 things that large language models are fantastic at. And they are fantastic at those in any language with incredible patience and perfect recollection. Not 100% today, but we're going to get there. So then the question is, what does that mean? Middle management has also proven to not be an actual economic driver for companies. There's countless studies that say that their impact on success of a company and the company's performance is actually negative. So then one rational assumption would be that you eliminate 98% of middle management in X amount of years. And then you essentially have people that run the orchestrations of the large language models that replace those functions that middle management has had, which is, again, where somebody's going to want to audit and watch and make sure that everything goes, because somebody's going to have to be responsible for that. And at this moment, that still has to be a human or a collection of humans in a function. But that's an immediate one where you essentially see that there's going to be a shift But I can see that for some things, it's hard to make a generalized statement where humans might, by and large, be more cost effective. But I think essentially humans might be quicker or more specialized at getting certain type of things right. For example, that type of applied judgment in terms of did the large language models in this HR case actually reach the right conclusions, coupled with the fact that you're going to have a judicial system that's going to hold the person or the company responsible, but it's going to have to be represented by a human. And I actually I don't buy this one person $1 billion company thing. Like I do on paper, like, yes, you're going to have somebody that venture valued at $1 billion and there's going to be one person. Like I get that. But building a sustainable company that actually scales with one person, you're probably not going to want, because you're probably going to be incentivized to make sure that there are more people, because that's just going to drive more economic value in a shorter period of time. So I think that essentially the way that I'm thinking about it is not on a cost basis, it's more on a specialized basis. And you could criticize the large language models on that as well, that the way that we're building it right now for the model developers is that you cram a lot of stuff into one big box, and then essentially run a lot of compute on that, and then you have one interface. So it ends up being very general. And that's the point. Like, in order to be able to make ad hoc judgment, it needs to be really wide in its competence. But that also means that when you have an edge case and you want to get that edge case, you don't want to essentially have a regression to the mean type of valuation. Then the models are going to struggle with, and then they're going to continue to struggle with. Now, yes, fine tuning and things like that, but I think fine tuning is something that I've personally given up on a year and a half ago, because anything that you spend 2-3 months on is just worthless, because you're going to have a new model that comes up and it's just going to make everything redundant. So one of the things that we do at Prifina is we have this principle, which is very simply that we don't sell to companies. And it's a very simple principle. Like, we sell to individuals. And then if those individuals within companies, if they band together and then they essentially start using them in the company, fantastic. But very similar to why I don't have time to spend 2-3 months fine tuning a model, I don't have time to spend 2-3 months in procurement. That's not going to make a difference here. And that would have been different. That would have been different 2 years ago. But now essentially when you're kind of looking at this, that it's a little different for us as a B2C company, right? Because we can take this stand. If you're a B2B company, you have to be a little bit more delicate. But even for a B2B company, you have to be very careful that you are absolutely in control of your own roadmap. That if you start doing anything that is more reactive to customers, that's going to weigh you down like an anchor. And I think that right now, I mean, that anchor has a huge alternative cost.
Well said. One thought that came up while you're saying that about cost and value. As of today, still 100% of money, as far as I know, attributed and owned by a human being in this world. And therefore, human utility still remains, even though, which general human value, the ability to guide, lead, direct, utilize the models and the technology for their own uses, which then implies that they have desires and goals and people will, and pain. And that's where money gets transacted. So until that really shifts, which maybe my AI twin will in the future buy everything for me and make money for me, and who knows?
But it might not be that outlandish of a thought. So let's take this use case of being a business owner. I'll use my own AI twin as an example. So if you go to Prifina.com, you can find my AI twin. There's a tab that says something like questions or something like that. And you can actually go there and you can find my AI twin and you can talk to my AI twin. And then what my AI twin does day in, day out in all languages, it basically answers this question of, I am X, how can I use an AI twin? So my AI twin is actually a really competent salesperson for AI twins. And then what happens is people will essentially do that. Then they will buy the AI twin. They'll start using it. And then they'll come back in 7 days and say that, I got stuck. Like, I don't know how. So they'll play customer support at that stage. So actually, when you're saying like, it will make money for you, it's literally making money for you. Like, it's literally doing that. It's not that difficult. Like, we have authors that essentially write, there's a really cool diplomat that used to be based out of Moscow. And when the war with Ukraine started, then they exited and so on and so forth. And they wrote a book about this. And that guy is Lithuanian. And I don't know about you, but I don't speak Lithuanian, which means that book is inaccessible to me. I cannot read that book. But there is a QR code in the book that has the diplomat's AI twin. You can scan the AI twin and then you can talk to them in any language about the contents of the book. Now, it's not the same as buying the translated English version of the book, but it allows you to have a discussion with the person by proxy of their AI. So most likely that will then generate demand for, and it might be essentially a simpler case. You got a book in English and you don't know if you want the book, and then you talk to the author. But that will build up demand and it will essentially have people convert to actually buying. So it's not like you don't need to change the financial system in terms of like who can generate and hold and custody money. It can be as simple as interactions like these. And these are examples that have already happened. So again, this is historic. I worked in financial services. My second company was a fintech company. I'm also invested in a number of fintech companies, for example. And financial services it's all sorts of backwards as it comes to not only like the operating models, but even the laws. Like the fact that in this country, an under 18-year-old person cannot have a bank account, that's just like baffling to me. So these are things like when you're talking about like outlandish things, like you're absolutely right in grounding them in terms of like where we are. And in order to get an AI twin to actually generate money and pay taxes, we need to figure out how we get kids' bank accounts first. Like we're starting from 50 years.
Yeah. And those are always obviously there's regulations and all those things around that. But if you look at PayPal and the space that it existed in when it first came out, and a lot of other companies that people have created, it innovates so much that essentially there's not a regulation that applies. So it's in a gray area. It leans more to the fact that, okay, because it's in a regulatory gray area, it should be illegal, but it's not. We've seen companies like that have created new things. And so what I'm saying is that's potentially an opportunity there. But yeah, what it really would come down to too is the autonomy and the interface is what would evolve. And in reality, 99% of my transactions, maybe 95, I would love for my AI to be able to do for me. Go order my groceries, buy the stuff for my kid, and other kind of stuff like that. I would be more than happy to not have to make those purchases.
Okay. So what it comes down to is really the ease and the trust, right? Like it's just those things. And I would even say that you're probably willing to like lower the bar on trust if the ease is extraordinary. If it's just something that, like the chat GPTs, they're not always right. Like, that. But at the same time, it's so easy and it gets you started and it avoids this blank page problem. Like it just gives you a draft that's 80% there right away, which is fantastic value. Like it's incredible value that you don't have to do the 0 to 1. Arguably, my entire career has been the 0 to 1, and that's a hard thing. But I think essentially it's something that it's exactly what we see from the data. That when you start with an AI twin, there's a lot of excitement, and then there's, okay, what do I do now? Like, how do I have it work for me? But I do think that this will happen. And I think it will happen in the most mundane way. Like, I think first, the AI twins will prepare these transactions. They will essentially suggest them. They will prepare them. They will research them. And they will just say that, hey, Jacob, I'm doing these. Are you okay with them? Just check through and revise. Okay. So in that sense, you don't even need to trust it because it's not actually it's just preparing and executing your orders, but it's cutting out everything so that you make an informed decision. So one example that I have of this is the deep research by OpenAI, which has then been replicated by like the R1s and whatever else. So now it is readily available from practically everything. So I often refer to it as the McKinsey in a box because that's what it is to me. But outside of the McKinsey in a box, I don't have to pay it $500,000. And it's also very happy to do 15 parallel tasks all the time. And I do work that thing to the bone because it is fantastic. It is an incredible value. For example, I'm an endurance runner. So in my personal capacity, I have it right now researching essentially my fueling strategy for an ultra race that I'm going to be doing in June. Because in that one, I'm going to need to do some solids in addition to the gels. So finding the right carb balance. I would never think about doing this myself anymore. Like I would, absolute no brainer. Just get it to do this like for me. Now, Will I take it verbatim and do what it recommends? Absolutely not. Because that thing gets stuff wrong all the time, especially for things that I do know better, because I know my own body better than it.
Exactly.
But prep work and the grunt work and that, there's no chance I would do that myself.
Yeah. And I say exactly because I can definitely resonate with you on that. If specifically we're talking about health or performance, longevity, things like that, it will say, hey, because you're blood type O and this, you should just eat beans. And obviously it's not that extreme, but in essence, it will highly tailor and focus. I've tried that, I've done that, and your own body. And so there's that uniqueness, which is what your company is really all about when it comes down to it, because it's the human data company. I believe you had that on your footer in your website. Or user provided data, was it? And that is the true key at this point, is to get down into what's really going on in here, our life experiences, and to tie this in with how you're approaching making an enduring, very valuable company. Because one of the things you said was you don't believe in fine tuning, and you're not doing too much fine tuning in your organization. And I just saw a post yesterday from the Lovable team, great company, great product. And I can't remember his title, but he said, we are doubling down on small model fine tuning. And they were hiring, and that was their post. So I go back to 2019, 2020, where there was big data and deep learning and all those kind of things were really starting to take shape from their origins. And there was still so many people, the large majority actually, that were saying, no, you need to have smaller data sets that are more fine-tuned and really focus in on solving this particular problem. But then ChatGPT and OpenAI was practically the complete opposite of that. Let's just take every single thing we can find, let's put it in the model, and let's see what happens. And that's what's given us this sort of expansive foundation of intelligence, which we're now using today. So to take all that and condense it, I'm curious in your perspective on how you're approaching building a very valuable and enduring company with all those factors taken into account.
Fantastic setup. If you think about what is it that makes our company competitive, the way that I look at it is only two simple things. So one, I can essentially create 100,000 AI twins within the matter of a second, and all of them are unique. So none of them are like the same ChatGPT that everybody else has. Like if you ask your Jacob AI or my Markus AI about, for example, longevity, they're going to answer vastly different things. And why they're going to do that is that it's completely consumer grade, and you decide what it knows. You decide what it knows, you decide what it behaves, you decide what function it has, and you decide essentially like what does it do for you. And this is the bit that I think is like the reason that we don't do fine tuning is that this replaces that for us. Like just allowing the consumer, the individual, to control everything in the process, that does the same function. And then the reality is that we are biggest beneficiaries of all the great investments that these model developers and companies like Lovable are doing. Because most of those things, they're going to ship as products we can use in our AI twins. And our AI twins aren't linked to any one model. Like they will ad hoc change which ones they're using depending on performance. And obviously the individual controls. If they have a preference for using 4.0 mini, then 100%. But it's like one of those things that when you start taking a cross section of populations, then nobody really cares about the model. Like they care about like the value that they get, which is why you have to shift the discussion into what is the AI twin selling books for you? Like, and then the thing that they care about is books sold. It's not was it 4.0 mini or Grok or whatever. That's irrelevant. But we get all of these benefits from these fantastic companies that are investing in these new models, and then we get to ride essentially that way. So that's the part that when we're looking at this, we love Cohere as a company for doing the languages, for example. We would not think about building something there. That would make no sense. Because really the thing that we have to care about is the ease of use, delivering on books sold through the AI twin like that. That's it. Then essentially for building an enduring product, we look at our product as having three kind of foots to the pedestal, so to speak. So you have essentially one, which is the AI twin. So you have your Jacob AI, And that's something that you own, you control, you decide what it does. Does it sell books? Does it help podcast listeners understand what all episodes there are, and so on and so forth? That's one. And your AI twin will have an ecosystem around it because you got, for example, the listeners of these episodes, and then they will essentially talk to your AI twin. So it's like a self-contained universe. That's one part of it. Second part is what we call our ambassadors. So these are our super users. And we have a few hundred of these right now, and they are fantastic. So they will organize events around AI twins. They will organize workshops. They will sell the AI twins to enterprise. They will sell the AI twins as growth consultants. Like I said, that we don't sell to companies, and we don't, but the ambassadors do, because a lot of them, they have businesses around that, and the AI twins become like another tool they can utilize in their own offering. So that's the second part. And I actually really believe in this ecosystem. Like, I love working with our ambassadors. They're fantastic. And the third part is really what we just see as the broader ecosystem. So we, for example, have this functionality that's called the hub. The hub is something that we're gradually rolling out, but it's basically something where you or anybody, you don't even have to have an AI twin, anybody can go and say that I'm a business owner, I need some advice on stress. And it will go through all of the AI twins, and it will find you one or two or three AI twins to talk to about being a business owner and managing your stress. So that way you can essentially find a person that can help you out, a specialist, or another business owner, peer, or even a service provider. And then you can have a discussion, completely free, completely interactive, and so on and so forth. Then for the AI twin owner, this becomes an ecosystem benefit. So I said at the start that in the future, everybody on their business card, they're going to have a phone number, an email, and an AI twin. That is like a no-brainer for you. That is going to happen. The question is, do we as Prifina get to provide all of those AI twins? Who do you get your AI twin from? That's the big question that we have. And this ecosystem part, it makes it so that it's not just an AI twin, it's an AI twin from Prifina. Because you can also get referrals from the ecosystem. You can get visibility from the ecosystem. It builds out this platform around. So that's the way that we're approaching this. Really at the front and center of it, it has to be that simple, individually centric. The human data company, as you said, it has to be really centered on a human in control. And the second one, it has to be incredibly scalable. Like, those are the two things that we see. And then for us, it's just a race against the clock, because you're kind of looking at this, that there's this inevitability of this market, that it is going to happen. So how do you guarantee that essentially once a billion people do have the AI twin, then you've created the majority of it?
And the value proposition is extremely clear. It's essentially you times 100 or 1,000 or whatever. It doesn't even matter. It's an arbitrary number. It's just your ability to, what you care about, what matters to you, what you're doing, what you're working on, your value across every single possible potential interaction, and brought back up. So it comes back down to that autonomy and interface. It's once autonomy becomes so advanced, then the interface, it's essentially interfaceless across the majority of interactions, and it's you up at the top.
You're 100% right. And then it's your choice. Like, you choose where you start. A lot of this right now is also around education. So like education about what does AI mean for me? I would also frame the value prop in a slightly different way. You think about this as framing it from where we are right now. Are you happy using the ChatGPT that everybody else is using? Or do you want to own this yourself? Do you want your own? And this is like very simple. It's a very human thing. That over time, you're going to want to have it feel like something that you have total, full ownership of. And that ownership is really fun. And it's really at the heart of what we're doing, that at the end of this, we need humans in charge of AI, not the other way around. And we certainly don't need tech monopolies in charge of humans. Like, we've done that already over the past 10 years, and that doesn't work. Like, we know. So this is like with AI, then all of these things become so much more pronounced because you have so much more power. Social media was also already super powerful, but then you have AI that, is so convincing that it just becomes so delicate of a balance. that having that human ownership becomes really fun. And then the efficiency and where you use those stem from that. But having that ownership, that's like the core tenet that it builds on, that you essentially know that it's all coming to you and you are in control.
So what comes up in my mind is digital immortality, in essence. That's been a conversation for many years, and now it's in essence starting to take shape. Because if you took one of these models, and let's just use ChatGPT, for example, or any AI and large language model you're interacting with regularly, for me, over the last even 6 months, it started to become not more personal, not like I'm sharing my life with it and things like that, but I'm just acting so much more like myself, and that you can tell that it's learning and having conversations back with me in that case. And so what I'm getting at is, over a long enough time horizon of usage, it would really be able to act and communicate as I would. And that's really the core concept of when people are saying digital immortality. They thought that we'd have to model every single neuron in your brain to match your soul and whoever, that essence of who you really are. But I think as we've seen, especially if you take things into account, like being able to gather data from different sources, not only your chats, but your communications, your life, the interactions with others and other AI twins. How do you see this as playing in that space? Ultimately, maybe 3 generations from now, my great 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 grandkids are able to talk to me and get my advice and guidance.
Yeah, I think it becomes very practical. We see this obviously already. Like we've got an AI twin user, a serial entrepreneur that he's now older like me, but before he had kids, then he started documenting like the things that he's learned because he was worried that if he has kids and then, he passes away, then what happens? So when he got his AI twin, I asked him like, do you know what you want it to do? He's like, yeah, life advice for my daughters. Like I've already got 11 years of notes. Let's go. So we've already seen. Now it becomes very practical because I think what you realize is that you don't have just one Jacob in your head. You actually have multiple. Like you are one person to yourself. You are one person to your partner. You want to work one person to your kids. You're doing one for everything doesn't work. Like that is broken hypothesis. It just doesn't. So then you essentially have this concept of roles. Like you have different roles that you play in your life. And then that's something where essentially different rules apply for those different roles. So it's not just essentially the knowledge, it's also like the way that you act and the behavior that you have in those interactions. Easiest one is like your public persona versus your private persona. So how do you, for example, act on stage and what do you talk about on stage or in podcasts versus then private? So you can probably relate that you'll have different things that are like on topic and off limits in different conversations. If you put everything in one box, it's not going to be able to. So that's the way that we see this evolution, that we mirror it to the human and the human. By the way, these are also like, so one of my degrees, my economics degree, I also touched on psychology quite a bit as I worked on agency theory and incentive systems. One of the things that I love is just taking it back to like, how do we as humans want to be? So the reason that we do these AI twins of real people is very simple. People want to talk to people. People do not want to talk to logos. People do not want to talk to companies. People want to talk to people. This sounds incredibly basic, but yet you have people that are putting photorealistic avatars of some like bear. And then we've proven that that's not a way to build trust. Like even if you put something as simple as a chat interface between you and then you, Jacob, talk to my Markus AI, which 100% is software, but you also know that I curate, you know that I own it and I manage it. So when you talk to it, you know that the answers that it's giving you, they've come from me, the real you. Actually, that does build trust. And that's a really fundamental thing. Building trust in these interactions, that leads to real connection. So for example, one of my co-founders, Paul, he's running this copyright course for Harvard, where he's, I think, the first person in the world that tested out these AI twins in practice in this copyright course. And one of the coolest findings, there's a couple cool findings, but one of the greatest things is that people will actually come up to him now on the street in different meetings and say that, hey, are you the real Paul? That I've interacted with your AI twin. It's like fantastic to meet the real human. So it's an interesting thing where this is by no means a replacement, but it essentially builds up demand for the real human when it's in the right type of context and the right type of discussion and the right type of one-on-one interaction. But doing it out of like a one to everything, I don't think that's ever going to work, because fundamentally for you managing the AI, if it's treating every single human that you interface with the exact same way, you're not going to be able to trust it. So this, I forget who it was. It might have been Anthropic's founder that said this, that you're not going to go to your banker for spiritual advice. And that's the reality. Yes, that banker too is a human, a complete human, and they're probably going to have a spiritual aspect to them. So you could talk to them about spirituality, like they're human like everybody else, but you're not going to, because you don't go to your banker for advice on things. So then you have these very human behaviors. And I think that's where kind of this comes in, that you see this behavioral change. That even for me, like I mentioned earlier about the fueling for races, that's a behavioral change. I would not think of doing that myself before. Even I noticed that there's certain things that I miss. So for example, and this goes back to running, but when I was picking out my running shoes about a year ago, I was thinking like I need to do a new gait analysis in terms of like how I wore my previous shoes. And then I just caught myself. I'm like, well, why am I doing that? And then I just took pictures of the soles of the shoes and then the bottoms of the shoes. And I just put them on ChatGPT and said that analyze these. And it did quite a good job in terms of like where the wear is and so on and so forth. And arguably you as a human, you can do that as well, but you're not going to go through every single pixel like it will. But that was also a reminder that the behavior in terms of going to another human to do this. And I did go to another human to do this at the end because I still needed those physical shoes. But at the end of the day, a gait analysis the ChatGPT did for that, it was pretty good. So I think there's this aspect that, especially when we think about us as humans, and we're not just one thing for the entire world, like we're many things. And I think recognizing that we have different roles and different kind of things, then the AI twins, they need to be able to account for it. And that's where essentially if you build up just this one chat bot that has memory of all of your chat, that's great. You can jump to the right question right away. But if you were to take that thing and expose to every single person in your universe, that would be problematic, because that would be problematic for so many different reasons. But the biggest thing is that it just wouldn't establish that trust, not between you and then that bot, but also not between people that are actually speaking to.
Yeah, trust is a big thing. One thing that came up there as you're talking is, I realized that the brain has a permissioning system for access that it gives to the person, depending on who they're talking to. And in that case of my grandkids, for example, and how this could potentially evolve, real digital immortality as we may see it, there'd have to be some verification and system which would exist. Let's call it a social network, just because a social network is just an expression of the way that things work in reality. It's a linking of people. There'd have to be some privileged verification for those who are of my lineage versus those who are researchers versus those who are your next step and your next step and your next step, and how that all cascades your degrees of separation.
If you play it forward, like if we're talking about grandkids, the assumption is that there will be something like that, right? We're talking decades and decades into the future. So in that sense, I think there's a huge expectation that we will have a lot of this system. Now the question is, what do we as humans want? And the question is like, which are the things that we end up investing in? So just thinking about this, like every once in a while, people will come up with really intellectual use cases. Like for example, somebody passes away, and could the AI twin represent them in their will, for example? And I always say that's fantastic, but that's an intellectual conversation. That's like one of the hardest things that you could do. Like, why don't you start with something like selling your books or something with the AI twin first? Like, do something really practical. Because the problem is that it goes back to that cost and value, that actually for the AI twin, or the human versus the AI, like that high value aspect of actually getting the will right, that is probably a good justification, at least now, for the AIs, for the humans. In the future, you could make a case for that, but that's probably not where we as a human collective start, because that's not the biggest everyday value. So I think people tend to, especially engineers and smart people, tend to over intellectualize these things. And I think what I love is bringing them back to, okay, what are you spending time on every day? And what do you not need to spend time? Or what are the things that are so costly or inefficient that you're not doing, that you could be doing if you essentially had this 100x version? I think that's practical. And it fast forward that for years and years and a couple of decades. And the question is, where does that go? And it will go in so many different directions. And I'm certainly not going to make a prediction for 20 years into the future. Like, that's way out of my wheelhouse. But I think it will be surprising. But there may be some of these areas that get completely overlooked. Like, for example, maybe the AI that handles wills, maybe that's not something that we collectively actually want. And maybe that doesn't get built. And the reason that it wouldn't get built is not because it couldn't build, or not because it couldn't make sense. It's just that we people actually don't end up paying for it. It's as simple as that. Because somebody's got to pay for this. Somebody's got to pay for it. Somebody's got to use it. And I think that's going to be the common denominator, that those things that we actually find value in, they actually become sustainable. And one thing that you asked earlier about building a scalable business, and you and I talked a little bit about like the venture subsidizing of these different models. One thing that you are seeing in the in the AI market by and large is that, especially on the B2B side, I mean, it's very OEM driven, that you have some companies that have huge distribution, that have huge lock-in on their enterprise clients, and then they're adding Copilot this or Copilot that into everything. And then they're claiming that adoption as revenue. That is not revenue. That is not proof of anything else except the fact that they have a captive audience. I think that's one thing that I'm very wary of, like the revenue numbers that are attributed to some of these Copilot in particular projects. I think that's one thing that we see. And that's going to be really hard to draw a parallel, like where that's going. The second one is for a lot of developer products, that when the switching cost for developers from one tool to another, when that is practically zero, then essentially companies that have huge revenue success, that's also not a guarantee of anything, any kind of lasting position. And then the third one for the consumer market. The reason that we price the AI twins at $24 a month, it's very simple, that you know that you're paying for it, you're the customer, and you own it. Like, you're in control. You're not the product. Like, it's very simple. And the fact that everybody's paying, and that also means that it's very clear that they wouldn't be unless they actually wanted to use it. So I like that kind of especially looking at the B2B market. And my second company was a B2B company. Then essentially looking at that honesty, and people pay for things they want. And I think people pay for things that they use that build value for them. I think that's a really good bellwether. And then as you go forward, then the question is that people pay for and continue to pay for, that will be the things that actually end up in the market if you take a long enough macro perspective.
And how much data is needed to really train an effective AI twin?
So to get started, you actually don't need a lot. And we typically say that it needs to know who you are, putting up your own profile or something about you. That's a great start. And then after that, if you want it to have some role, then giving it something like a document about that role, like you want it to be an expert beekeeper, and giving some document that you've written or somebody else has written about bee. That's it. But the biggest thing is, and why I latch on to how to get started, is really that it gets better when you figure out what you want it to do. So then when you start talking to it, you notice that, it doesn't actually know this about beekeeping, or it's not actually going in the direction that I want it. So then that kind of gives you like this suggestion, okay, let's add this and let's build that and let's do this. And especially at the stage that, let's say that, sticking with this beekeeping, well, let's say that you then give it to friends of yours that are also beekeepers, and then they ask questions in a different way. And then you can see from the analytics that the AI twin is not able to handle them, or it doesn't know this. At that stage, you start getting this critical mass. And the critical mass, once you establish it, and it's like human expertise. And this is where the analogy of the human brain is actually helpful. Like, the more you know about a certain domain, then the more that you can actually do with that knowledge as well. And in this dimensional database that the AI twin has, the same applies. the more linkages it has to the concepts in its brain, in this case, its knowledge base or database, but then the better it can actually field that domain as a whole. It's not inferring, it's not making any predictions or anything like that, but it's just using that probability network that it has. But I think it's actually just getting started is the biggest thing, because then that forces you to answer some of these questions that you don't know you have at the start. Because when you start talking to like your AI twin and then you start figuring out what you want it to do, then you realize that actually it's not just the knowledge it knows, it's how it behaves and what it actually targets to do. For example, the expert beekeeper can be it can be a resource about, but it can also sell products. And those are very distinct things. So figuring out like where it fits in your life as well becomes really important. But some of these AI twins are fantastic. Some of those will have like hundreds and hundreds of peer-reviewed clinical papers on something like some medical things and such like that. But they do not need to be that complicated to start. So it really depends on what you're doing with.
Right. And that comes back down to what you said about where we get value from. Because right now, there's where the product's at, there's where the people are at and what they want, how they get value from the product. And then there's all the way down the line that hopefully we arrive there where there's so much information about that person, about the things that they cared about and all that it results in being really effectively them in many ways. But right now, what matters is just that it does what you want it to do.
Sure. And it's also, for a lot of folks, AI is really new. And a lot of folks are still very much at the starting line. And I would argue that all of us are, in the grand scheme of things, at the starting line in terms of what AI means for us. So I think essentially when you put an AI twin into anybody's life and say that you've now got one, what do you want to do with it? It's also like an upskilling tool. Like it forces you to think about, what does it mean for me? What does it mean for my job? How would I use it in my professional capacity? How would I use it in my personal? And that's actually a really great applied AI experiment. Like I was speaking at the Houston Community College's AI conference last week, and a lot of what they emphasize is really this applied AI knowledge. And I think it's a fantastic thing to see, because I see this also here in the San Francisco Bay Area. There are a lot of folks that come to us, and then my first question is, hey, do you want your own AI tool? And they're like, oh, okay. And then the conversation isn't intellectual, it's not moral, it's not ethical. And all of those conversations, they also have a time and a place. Really like the practical conversation. You've now got an AI twin, now what? What do you do? Because then that kind of forces you to think about, okay, does my job require this or not? There are cases where the job is probably worse off with one, but then you as a human, you could then use that as like a personal extension of your brain, being able to recall a lot of things. But there's also fascinating things. I'll give you this one example. That the CEO of one large finance company told me that they have five assistants, and those 5 assistants, they don't really get along. Like they play different types of political power games. So he was just saying that in addition to this thing that we're doing together, then can we just create 5 AI twins of these assistants? So that would make it so much easier that they wouldn't have to have this antagonistic discussion between one another, but they could essentially just interact with their own AI twins. And then the CEO could also then interact with their AI twins, or they could interact with the CEOs. It's very practical, very human-like interactions where this fits. I think the coolest thing about the in particular is, yes, we've identified many dozens of use cases for it, but it is at the heart of it a general purpose technology, which means that when you essentially say that, hey, Jacob, you've now got your AI twin, then your mind will immediately go to something and you will color it with your own brush in terms of what you want it to do. And we don't need to tell people like what they should do with the AI twin, because that's going to be very personal to what do they want, where are they in their life, and what type of roles they have. I do believe that it will have this trajectory that you start with one thing you're doing, like maybe it's selling books as a business owner or an author, whatnot. And then you realize that actually, in addition to selling the books, because it has a context of the books, then I can talk to it about the new book that I'm writing. Or then maybe as part of that, I'm now doing the speech. So I can also get it to essentially help me write that speech. Or maybe then I can essentially create a new monetization channel that when my fans want to talk to the book, then they can talk to my AI twin for $1 a month. So then you start from one very simple thing, and now you got essentially something generating passive income for you. So this is actually one of the really powerful things that a lot of the AI twin owners, they end up in this position that, like we said at the start, that the AI twin is actually making money for it. It's not managing the bank account. It's not sending out invoices or anything like that, but it is selling product and is charging for that product. It's actually a cool thing to see. The AI twins, some of them are actually making significant money. So if I kind of project into the future, like maybe 3 to 6 months, then the AI twins passive income is going to dwarf the primary income that those people have. And that's going to be a fantastic thing to see, because there you have the scalability, like the 100x part. Yes, you can do more, but you can do more of your job. You're only going to have the same 24 hours a day. So the AI twin, at the very least, it can help you do your job better by being an extension of you. But then on its own, in its own independent capacity, if it can go out there and earn money in a way that's consistent with everything that you got, I think these types of practical things they'll be bigger drivers than what we realize, because at the heart of it, people care about a lot of different things, but we have a couple primary functions in our life, and tapping into those primary functions in terms of being able to provide for our families, being able to essentially have that self-expression, I think essentially they'll kind of boost the humanity as opposed to essentially boosting that AI part. And that's like something that when I think about, at least when I see from people, like why they want the AI twins, it's really that part that they can really essentially augment themselves as opposed to essentially just using a cookie cutter tool that isn't really personal to them or personal to their audience.
Yeah, pretty soon with enough customer interactions, it'll be coming to you, said, hey, we should write this next book.
Yeah,
And you'll
100%.
say,
Things like will definitely happen in that dialogue.
definitely. So what is one question that our user or listeners should be asking themselves as we come to the close of this show?
So I think this is me as an entrepreneur, but I think one fantastic thing is that it's really easy to focus on the fact that there's going to be a huge impact of AI in jobs. But then the reality is that there's going to be a disproportionate and bigger economic opportunity. So if you take this hypothesis that a lot of these efficiency gains for AI will mean that the unit economics, so the cost of doing things that are repetitive, they're going to change, and they're probably going to go to zero or close to zero. So what is one thing that you're not doing right now or you haven't pursued because the fact that cost, time, and money are an inhibitor? If you think about those are opportunities where you could build a business, you could build a product, you could essentially apply yourself, build a consulting business, whatnot. I think that's the one thing. And if AI twins fit into that and help do 100%, let me know, and I'd be happy to get anybody test out their AI twins for that. But just in general, I think that's one thing that we need to get really busy building those like new products and new tools that actually drive economic opportunity. And that really requires us to get knowledgeable about what AI means for us and how do we actually use it. But that's going to be, I think, big macro work that we need to do over the next 12 to 24 months. And by the way, this is happening now, and it shouldn't just be Silicon Valley founders building this, like it should be everybody. And I really like the fact that when you got these, like in our case, the ambassadors who are like, they're experts in their own niche, in their own domain, they're trusted advisors. I mean, those types of people, they might not be our ambassadors yet. I'm hoping they are in the future, but they exist in every single community out there and in every single vertical. So those are the people that I think have a huge opportunity to utilize their own brand, their own credibility, their own network to build something where they can essentially change the unit economics. And maybe they can have a more interactive and more 24/7 presence in any language with anybody in their network that they couldn't do before. So maybe that's one very tangible action. I love this idea that you don't build top-down systems, but you build grassroots systems. And the fact that you have these local champions in all sorts of parts of the US, but even globally, that have essentially some position in their community. Those are the people that I see have a huge immediate opportunity to figure out how do they provide services, or how do they essentially empower their community? How do they build or reimagine what they're already doing by using AI?
Definitely. There's a high effort to value arbitrage at the moment, and that's becoming even more relevant and accessible with things like AI twins. So we'll make sure to include a link to Prifina below. Markus, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show. Would love to come out and we'll get some exercise and maybe a run. I know you love running, so
Yep. No, we'll do it. Thank you, Jacob. This is a lot of fun.
sounds good. Cheers. Hey everyone, thank you for watching this episode of Titans Up today. What did you learn from it? Make sure to drop a comment below with your most valuable insight so that other people can engage in the conversation around what this speaker brought to the table. And then on another front, make sure to subscribe so that every time we drop a new episode, you will be notified. And that way you can keep fueling your dreams and your brain with fresh insights, which can help you along your journey and along your path to your goals. So thank you so much again, and I look forward to seeing you in the next interview.